What's happening in biology? This is Mrs. Cozen, and this is going to be Unit 5, Video 1, Cellular Respiration. And you guys can call this one the reactions of cellular respiration. Okay. Key vocabulary here, remember you do not need to write these. Okay. We're going to talk about cellular respiration as a process. We're going to talk about glycolysis, anaerobic, and then aerobic, and then fermentation and pyruvic acid, and there's going to be a few other words in there as well. All right. Now, we stored energy in photosynthesis in a molecule called glucose. That's the point of photosynthesis, to take energy from the sun and to store it so it can be used later. And now we're going to take that and we're going to process it. All right, and this is just my little comic, little nerd joke here to get you guys moving on cellular respiration. And this is supposed to be, if you guys recognize this organelle from all living cells, it's called a mitochondria. And this mitochondria says, when are you planning to find a job? And don't give me the excuse you don't have any energy. You're a mitochondria for nucleus sake. Remember, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's the thing that's helping to process energy for cells. Okay? So they should have plenty of energy. Get off the couch, lazy mitochondria. Okay, cellular respiration is used by plants and animals and fungi, really everything except for little prokaryotes, think bacteria. It's used by every other eukaryotic cells. And it happens inside the mitochondria. And here is your formula. We probably went over this one in class by the time you got to this video, but just in case. You've got, we take in glucose and oxygen, and we process that. Here's our chemical reaction. And our products are CO2, H2O, and energy in the form of ATP. If you guys notice, this is the exact same thing as photosynthesis, just backwards. Now, the first step in cellular respiration is called glycolysis. It happens in the cytoplasm. So this first part actually doesn't happen in the mitochondria, but it's a really important part of cellular respiration because if we didn't do this, we couldn't process our glucose down into ATP. And it's really just taking the glucose and breaking it down. If you guys see, we start with glucose here. So think glucose, and then lysis sort of means to break apart. So we're just taking that glucose and we're really just chopping it up. Think when you're cooking something, like if you're cooking vegetables or like chicken noodle soup, you need to chop up those vegetables before you can actually do the cooking. That's kind of what glycolysis is. At the end of glycolysis, you end up with 2 ATP molecules. Remember, ATP is our energy currency. You end up with something called pyruvic acid. It's also sometimes called a pyruvate. And then these 2 molecules called NADH, and we're going to use these later. We're going to use this high-energy hydrogen molecule to make more ATP later. Okay. In glycolysis, we actually have 4 ATP that are made total, but we used 2 of them to do this, to break down the glucose right here. So at the end, we end up with 2 total. So we made 4, we used 2 of them to get things going, so we end up with 2 what you would call net ATP. Okay, now from here, we're going to go into what we call, if we have oxygen, we're going to move into what we call aerobic respiration. Glycolysis is not aerobic. It doesn't need oxygen. It happens in the cytoplasm. But if we're going to go through aerobic respiration next, and we have lots of oxygen, we're going to move into the mitochondria, and we're going to do one of these 2 things. Okay, first one is called the Krebs cycle, and the second one's called the electron transport chain. Remember, this is only if we still have available oxygen. After glycolysis, if we don't have available oxygen, we're going to go through a process called fermentation. So after glycolysis, you have 2 choices. You have aerobic. If you've got oxygen, you go to Krebs cycle. If you don't have oxygen, you move to anaerobic, which is fermentation. Okay, so let's say that we don't have oxygen left over in our cells. You're going to move to fermentation, and there are 2 types of fermentation that we can have. I put this one first called lactic acid fermentation, because this is probably one that you're most familiar with. When your muscles burn during a really high intensity activity, That's lactic acid that's being produced through fermentation. And it's not that you don't have any oxygen in your body, it's just that the oxygen in your muscle cells is being used up really, really quickly. Think about when you're running like a sprint. You can only run a sprint for so long. And then eventually your muscles start to run out of oxygen. That's why you're breathing so hard. And lactic acid starts to be formed, and that's why your muscles actually burn. And it's the process of breaking down muscles with that acid, and then building it back up that helps us to break muscles down and then build them up, make them bigger. It also is something that happens in microorganisms. Think your yogurt. Your yogurt tastes a little bit sour because those bacteria go through fermentation. There's no oxygen. Those little microorganisms don't have mitochondria anyways, so they have to go through lactic acid fermentation. And the other process is alcoholic fermentation, and that happens in yeast and in some other bacteria. It's the thing that helps your bread to rise. So think when you're eating a piece of bread and you see all those little teeny tiny sort of holes in it, that was through the process of fermentation, and this sort of alcohol was produced. It's also the same process that makes alcohol, beer, wine, liquor, any of those things are made through alcoholic fermentation, through certain yeast and bacteria. Yeah, so you have two types of fermentation, and remember this only happens if there's no oxygen. Okay, now we're going to talk about the process that happens if we do have oxygen. And we've got two options there, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. Okay, Krebs cycle. It's aerobic, it uses oxygen. We've now moved the two that I was talking about before, fermentation and glycolysis, that happens in the cytoplasm. These happen in the mitochondria. So mitochondria, think oxygen. Can't be working in the mitochondria without oxygen. Okay? We made 2 pyruvic acids in glycolysis. Remember, we made 2 ATP, 2 pyruvic acids, 2 NADHs. Now we're going to take those 2 pyruvic acids, that's our raw material, and then the Krebs cycle is going to process those, and it's going to put out more ATP, which is going to continue to fuel our cycle, and then CO2. Remember, when you breathe out, you produce CO2. It's a waste product. It's a waste product of the Krebs cycle. Okay? We still have to make a lot more ATP, and we have to make some water, and we haven't really taken in all of our oxygen yet, so we still have quite a few parts of our reaction to use. Okay. The last process, the electron transport chain. Sometimes you guys will hear me call this the ETC. This is our last aerobic process. It uses oxygen in the mitochondria. All right. So remember, one of our reactants, or things we take in cellular respiration, is oxygen. So here, we're really going to take in that oxygen and utilize it. And we made these two little things called NADHs. We made those in glycolysis. Now we're going to use them to help fuel more ATP production. Okay, so these high energy hydrogen electrons are going to help us to do that. Now, the products of the electron transport chain, think transport chain, think of it, you're transporting energy down this chain. It's like a little assembly line to make ATP. And we finally get those ATPs at the end that we really need. So we end up with 32 ATP at the end of this one. So the other two, just really kind of processing materials. Now we really pumped out that energy, okay? And then we get water as our other product. So now we've gone through all the products of cellular respiration. We've taken in our reactants and put out our products. Okay, now one of the other things that you need to be able to do in this unit is to compare and contrast photosynthesis and respiration. You need to tell me how they're related, how they're dependent on each other. You need to tell me how they're different, how they're the same. So the first thing, in terms of energy, okay, so this is a contrast. Photosynthesis stores your energy, stores the energy of sunlight in those glucose molecules, and then cellular respiration releases the energy that we stored in the glucose molecules. Okay, so that's why plants can't just go through this. Okay, they can't just do photosynthesis. They have to do cellular respiration as well. All right, and then here's a picture of your formulas. You guys hear formula for photosynthesis? You guys can see energy coming in. Now before I've shown you this energy as sunlight here over your reaction, okay? And here it's stored as this molecule. And then here in aerobic respiration or cellular respiration, we start with that at the beginning, and then as we go through our reaction, the energy is released. Okay? So just a visual to help back up that idea that photosynthesis stores energy, cellular respiration releases it. Okay, we're going to do this in class together. That's it, you guys. You are done with cellular respiration. Woohoo!